Right, guys and girls, so today we're going to be doing an LS430 2000 to 2003, and this is going into an IS200 using a manual gearbox, and it is completely plug and play. So let's get into it. Right, as I said, this is an LS430 2000 to 2003, so it came with a 5-speed automatic gearbox originally, and this is going to be plug and play into an IS200, and it is going to be used with a manual BMW gearbox. So, as you can see, this is an adapted harness, so what that means is we've taken the customer's original harness, we've obviously stripped it all down, removed what needs removing, added what needs adding, and obviously we've made it plug and play to interface with the IS200. So, first thing we're going to do, let's take a couple look at the photos and see what that process entails of obviously stripping it down, cleaning it, and adding all the new sections in. We'll be back in a second. Right, so there you go. You can obviously see we take everything apart. Obviously, we clean it first, take everything apart, remove what needs removing, add what needs adding, and obviously make all the stuff to make sure it is plug and play into an IS200. So what we're going to do today, well, pretty much the same thing we do every time. We're going to be going through the layout of the harness first. So we're going to go through the entire harness and show the customer where everything goes, where it plugs in, and how it's routed. Then what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the testing. So that involves testing just with the ignition on. There's a couple of things that we check, lights on the dash, ambient temperature, etc. And then we move into testing with the engine actually running. Okay, so let's start off with the layout of the harness. And as you can see down here, as it's plug and play, it goes directly into the original ECU box of the IS200. Obviously, this is a bit of a mess because it doesn't reach there over there. So what I'll do is I'll cut to a photo of now what it looks like when it's all neatly tucked away. So as you can see, really nice and neat there. Okay. Right, so what we're going to do is start here at the ECU side and work our way around. So ECU side is very simple. You've got 3 plugs over here, 1, 2, and 3, okay? You've got 2 body plugs over here. Obviously, some of these body plugs do make their way into the engine harness, but that's okay because obviously we make a little patch harness here to interface with the 2 existing IS200 plugs. So these are the ones that are left behind when you remove your 1G-FE engine, okay? The other plugs that are associated with the engine are going to be these 3 plugs down here. Now, obviously, we've reused the white one and the blue one from the LS430, but obviously the white one goes into the gray section over there, the blue one goes into the black section over there, and this is one we've added in that didn't come on the LS430 harness, and this is a little blue plug over here. We've obviously used a gray one, which we had in stock over here. Now then, all 3 of these plugs are unique. You can't plug them into the wrong place, so you don't have to stress about that at all. You will never get them incorrect. Same thing applies to the ECU. All of these plugs are unique. You cannot plug the wrong plug into the wrong place. Just a note for everybody, when you are putting this in, please make sure that you have these 2 plugs facing towards the front of the vehicle and the 3 plugs facing towards the rear of the vehicle. Okay. Right, so we've got that, and then you'll see we've got a little relay over here, and that is to mimic the brake switch that's normally in the LS430 3UZ, which is not present on an IS200 manual. And because the ECU gives out a 4-cylinder tacho signal, obviously we've got a little converter box here that converts a 4-cylinder to a 6-cylinder. This is completely adjustable. So if you pop open the back here, you'll see there's a little blue pot resistor. You can use a screwdriver and you can adjust that to get it absolutely accurate. I try my best to adjust it here before the harness goes up, but if you find it's a little bit inaccurate for you, then obviously you can adjust that. That's no problem at all. Okay. Last thing you'll notice is obviously the ECU doesn't actually fit inside the ECU box itself. Now this is obviously an IS200 ECU box. It was designed for the rectangular shaped ones, not for the wedge shaped ones. Now there are 2 options for you. One, if you've got lucky enough to have an IS300 ECU box, now this applies to European models from 01 to 05 and US models from 01 to 05, because the IS300 had the wedge shaped ECU, which is the same as the 3UZ, and obviously this will slot directly in. If you don't have access to that, do not stress at all. Basically, what you can do is you can remove these 4 screws there, and there. You can pull out the PCB board there, and you can take a grinder and you can actually just grind this lip off, and the ECU will then just slot straight into the case, okay? Obviously, we don't remove it here. Obvious reason is we don't want to, if you guys do have access to an IS200 box, it is not necessary. So again, we don't remove it here, but you are free to do that if you only have access to an IS200 ECU box. Okay, so that's the ECU box over there. Moving along, we then come to our grommet. That grommet actually goes inside here. So again, you just push that down directly into there, no problem at all. And then moving along here, we then get our first piece of plastic that keeps everything together wiring wise. And nice and simple, there's just 2 mounting points there and there. Really, really straightforward. Out of here, our first section that pops out is going to be over here, and that's going to be injector 1 and coil 1 over there. Okay, right, so this engine, the cylinders are numbered on the left bank, 1, 3, 5, and 7. Okay, opposite side there, the right bank is 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay, so again, when I say left bank, I'm always referring to the view from the driver's position. So in other words, looking at the back of the engine. So this is left and that's right. They can also be referred to as bank 1 and bank 2. And that becomes important with the knock sensor plugs underneath, because we refer to them as knock 1 and knock 2. So knock 1 goes on the left bank and knock 2 goes on the right bank. But we'll get to that in a minute when we get to that section. Okay. Right, so again, injector 1, coil 1, nice and simple. Up to the front here, and then we have another breakout section over here, and that's going to go to the oil control valve for the left bank, or bank 1. So again, this is the VVT-i. So remember, the VVT-i on the 3UZ and the 1UZ VVT-i is only on the inlet cams. It's not on the exhaust cams. That's the later engines like the GR and the UR that operate both VVT-i on exhaust and intake. Okay. Moving along down here, we then have another breakout section over here, and that goes to our TPS. So you remember, if this 3UZ was a 6-speed model or the second generation of 3UZ, you know you'd have a big 6-pin plug on that side. This is a 5-speed, and that's the way to tell. You've got a 4-pin TPS over here and a 2-pin drive-by-wire motor plug over there. Moving along over here, and you'll see there's a mounting point there. You can obviously put a little clip or something on there and mount the harness down there to keep it out of the way. But just shortly after that, we break out again, and that goes to the cam sensor for the front of the engine. Okay, now the 1UZ and the 3UZ VVT-i actually have 3 cam sensors, so we'll get to the other 2 a little bit later. But this one is a single tooth trigger on the cam sensor, and this is obviously for the ECU to tell what position the engine is in. The other 2 cam sensors are actually on the inlet cams, and they have 3 teeth per rotation, and they're used to the ECU to determine that whatever it's commanding the oil control valve to do in terms of advancing and retarding the cam is actually being done. Okay. Moving along here, and you'll see the space for a clip there and a clip there. Ignore my clips, it's just these are easier to get the wiring harness out, and obviously I'm taking harnesses out all the time. But we move along through there, and then we end up at a breakout just after that clip over there. All right, there's 3 sections that are going to pop out here. The first one I'm going to go through is just this section over here. It pops down, it goes through here. I wonder if we can, there you go, you can see my fingers touching it there. Pops down through there and goes to the crank sensor. So this is your crank sensor down at the bottom over here. Okay, another section that pops out is going to be the AC plug, right? So important note, if you guys do have an LS430, the LS430 not only had this triangular plug which has the 12 volts switch for the magnetic clutch, but it also had a 2-pin connector for a solenoid on the back of the AC compressor. Okay, now in the LS430 that was controlled via the AC control ECU. Obviously that is not the case in the IS200. It doesn't control a separate solenoid, so the LS430 pump cannot be used on an IS200, 300 or Altezza swap. Okay, now then, luckily for us, Toyota used the same AC plug for the GS430 and the SC430, so those AC pumps can be used absolutely no problem because they only have this connector on. Okay, you can also use a 1UZ VVT-i AC pump as well, and obviously the later generations of the 1UZ non-VVT-i. So there is quite a wide range of AC pumps that you can use, but the only one you can't use is obviously the LS430 and the later generation GS430, so the one that ran from 05 to 07. Okay, that again also used just a solenoid plug, and the later LS430 actually ditched this plug altogether and only ran the solenoid plug to control the AC. Okay, the last section that pops out over here is going to be down there. I've got it coming through here. Obviously that would run around the back of your AC pump. Now in my case, it's coming to the oil pressure switch over here. Now again, this is an LS430 motor. This has the oil filter housing that comes forward. This cannot be used in an IS200 300 Altezza swap. You need to use the one that comes either from a GS430, SC430. Now these are the first generation ones because they all had the front engine sump, which again is another thing that you need for the swap. This is an LS430 sump. It's mid/rear, whatever you want to call it, and this will not work on an IS200 300 swap. Okay, so your oil one will come down here, go along through there, and plug in the back because your oil switch is actually facing backwards over there. Right, so that's this section over here. Let's pop back up and carry on with the rest of it. All right, so that's this plastic section over here. We've gone through both breakouts, really nice and simple. Moving along, you'll see there's a small section here where it's uncovered, and then we get into our next piece of plastic that's keeping everything together. Again, nice and simple, bolt there, 10mm socket. Those will tighten those down, no problem. Pretty much all of these are 10mm sockets. Right, in this plastic section here, we have 3 breakouts. The first one, which you can see right over here, is going to go to injector 3, coil 3, and the VVL cam sensor, or variable valve timing left cam sensor. So as I said, inside your cam cave, you pull it off, you'll see there's actually 3 teeth on the cam, and that's what this is measuring, and the ECU is using that to determine that what it's commanding from the VVT-i system is actually being done on the engine. So that's what that is for. Okay. Next breakout is this one over here, and you have in injector 5, coil 5, and you have your noise filter over there. So again, this is probably not what your engine looks like. Obviously, this one usually has a cover on the top of it, so there's a couple of brackets with those. But anyway, that is the plug for that. It just looks like that. It's basically a capacitor, and it's used to absorb the noise from the injectors and the coils firing and keep it away from electrical things like the NOx sensors, the O2 sensors, and the crank and cam sensors. Okay, and there is one on the other side as well, so you can see we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so that's that little section over there. The last section over here is going to go to injector 7 and coil 7. Okay, so as you can see, they're relatively straightforward. They kind of, where they break out is where everything they plug into goes. Okay, so it's really, really straightforward. Shouldn't cause you any issues there at all. All right. Moving to the end of the piece of plastic, we then have a little sort of section, again, uncovered, that goes down there to allow it to bend over the fuel pulsation damper. Fuel pulsation damper, not regulator. Please don't screw these with a foot of screwdriver, guys. You will just damage them and they won't do their job. Remember, fuel pulsation damper is there designed to remove the pulsations caused by the injector actually firing. So that's what these are doing. The 3UZ and the 1UZ VVT-i run a deadhead system, so there is no return. The fuel pressure regulation is done inside the tank, and not obviously on the engine itself, like the 1UZ non-VVT-i. So if you're using these engines in swaps of other vehicles, you do have to obviously fit your own fuel pressure regulator. Okay, but in the case of the IS200, it's a deadhead system, uses pretty much exactly the same pump, so you can basically just plumb it up exactly like I've done here to your original IS200 fuel lines, and that should be absolutely fine. Right, so moving along down to here, we then have a breakout at the bottom over here, and just little 3 sections that pop out here. So first of all, we've got our earth terminal there, so that just bolts into the M6 bolt there. Again, 10mm socket to tighten that one up. You won't have any bolts in these two here on a 3UZ, only this one over here. Obviously, I have these in here because I use the same engine for 1UZ and 3UZ VVT-i harnesses, but this is where a 1UZ VVT-i would go. That's where a 3UZ goes. Okay. Also coming out of here, going down into there, hopefully you can see, is your oxygen sensor for the left bank main. Okay, so remember, we only use oxygen sensors on the main section, so just the ones that go inside the inlet exhaust manifold. We don't use a secondary. They're actually remapped out as part of the ECU remap to make it manual, as well as more power, better throttle response, all of that type of stuff. Okay, last section that pops out over here is going to be our gearbox harness. Okay, so again, we've standardized this, so we do have all the wiring in there for both a speed sensor and a reverse switch. Now, obviously, this customer is using a BMW gearbox that does not have a speed sensor on it. So in this particular case, we just have the reverse plug, and that is labeled for you there, reverse. Okay. What you'll notice is I've cable tied a little piece of wire on here. So remember, on the IS200s, the manual version took its speed from the speed sensor on the back of the J160 gearbox. Now, the auto versions took their speed from the ABS ECU. And the ABS ECU is just down here on the driver's side. You can see I've got it there. Obviously, one of the plugs is unplugged, but there are 4 plugs over there. That's your ABS ECU, okay? So what we do in this particular case is we're actually providing the customer with a wire like so. He's going to then be able to put that into the ABS ECU and run the wire up to his dash, and therefore he will get his speed from his ABS ECU. So there is no problem there at all. If I haven't done a video, I'll do a video on exactly how that works, but I'll keep that in a separate video. Just for your information, there's a ton of links down in the bottom of a bunch of videos that I've done in relation to this particular engine. Things like how the fuel systems work, how the ACIS works, etc., etc. So I do advise you to go have a quick scan through those, give them a quick watch, because those are much shorter videos that are designed to help you guys understand exactly how everything works in this particular vehicle and with this particular swap. Okay. Right, so those are the three sections that break out there, really nice and super simple. You'll notice down here we have a little piece of sort of plastic there holding some wire in there. That is going to be your starter knock harness, or that's basically what I call it, because it goes underneath the inlet manifold and it plugs into the starter solenoid and plugs into the knock sensors. This big thick cable that you see here, this is obviously the main power for the starter, and this just goes directly onto your battery over there. Okay. If you're wondering what this little flap sticking out here is, it's basically because Toyota's trying to save money. They use the same piece of plastic whether it's left or right-hand drive. So if it's left-hand drive, the starter wire just goes that way to the battery, which would be over there. If it's right-hand drive, it just comes straight up over to here and over to there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're quickly going to take a look at this sub-harness that goes underneath. So I cut to a picture now. So that's the overall picture, so you can see what it should look like. Remember I said knock 1 is the left bank and knock 2 is the right bank. Okay. Right, so you'll see it goes to the starter solenoid. That's the little gray plug over there. So that just plugs directly into the starter solenoid. And then it goes to knock sensor 1. So you'll see that we have actually labeled that. So you can see K and K1 on there. Then it goes to knock sensor 2. And again, you'll see that that is labeled for you as K and K2. Okay, right. So what you'll notice is obviously we completely rebuilt the knock sensor wires. I'll show you why now. And you'll see that those were originally twisted and taped together. So obviously that wasn't going to work, and we would never send anything out like that in this particular case. So you'll see here, all the wires have been replaced from the plug all the way down to the knock sensors for you guys. Okay, right, so that's that section over there. Let's pop over to the other side and carry on over there. Right, so moving along the plastic section over here, you'll see we have another breakout coming out the bottom here at the back, and we've got another earth ring terminal there. So again, M6 bolt, 10 socket, tighten that one down. I didn't mention on the other side, but guys, what I advise you guys to always do is just to get yourself a piece of emery cloth or something and just clean these earthing points before you bolt them down. Toyotas are very sensitive to earths, so give yourself a leg up and get everything nice and clean before you bolt it all down. Okay, also coming out the back here is going to be your pedal harness. Let's see if I can get that to focus there quickly. Okay, 6-pin DTM connector going off to a pedal plug, which again is labeled, and in this case he's using an IS200, 250, 350 accelerator pedal. I've done a video on the pedals and what you can and can't use, so an explanation there is exactly why we use these pedals. So again, down in the description you can have a look at that and see when I go through that whole particular setup and why we choose this pedal. Right, moving along from there, we then end up at the end of the plastic over here, and nearly forgot, the plastic at the back here mounts there with that one bolt and there with that one bolt. So again, everything is pretty much 2 bolts. 2 bolts for that one, 2 bolts for that one, 2 bolts for this one. Really nice and simple. Okay, but coming out here, we're then going to have injector 8 and coil 8. Moving along to over here, we then have another breakout section, and it's going to go to injector 6, which you can see there, and coil 6 over there. And it also goes over to the ACIS plug, or the acoustic control induction system plug. This goes to the vacuum solenoid valve, which is underneath the intake. Now, this is where I would advise you guys, obviously you have to take the intake off to put the starter knock harness in. That is the perfect time to test that particular solenoid, and it's really, really easy to test. Now, what you'll see over here, you'll see there's a black wire and there's a blue with a white tracer wire. The black wire is 12 volts, the blue with the white tracer is ground. So these colors might change from engine to engine. Toyota had a tendency to do that, so do not stress about that. This we know is exactly the harness that the customer is going to get. So we know that the black is 12 volts, we know that the blue with the white is ground. So in this case, we know the black is 12 volts and we know the white is ground, okay? That vacuum solenoid valve is polarity sensitive, so it only works in one direction, okay? So you must connect it up correctly, but while the intake manifold is off and on the ground, supply 12 volts to there, ground to there, and you should hear that vacuum solenoid valve make a clicking noise, or it'll just click once, basically. If it doesn't do that, now's the time to replace it, because otherwise, if you put everything back together and find the ACIS valve is not working, you've got to pull the whole intake off again to get access to it. So, guys, strongly advise when you have the intake off to put the starter knock harness back on, test that valve to make sure that it works. And if you want, replace it. It'll be good for another 20 years. Okay. Right, so that's that section over there. Now what you'll see is the customer actually had these clips left on his harness off. Just put these back on again. So you'll see there should be brackets here with a little L-shaped bracket on here, and that's going to clip directly into there for him. All right. Moving forward, we have another breakout section over here, and that's going to go to the cam sensor for the right bank. So same as the one on the left bank over there. It's going to go to injector 4 and coil 4. Let me see if I can get a picture. There's the injector over there. Okay. Also going to come out and go to the noise filter for the right bank over here. Again, this is not where your one is probably going to be mounted. There's a bracket on here for the cover, and I think that has this on and actually faces that direction. So again, this is not how it should be mounted. It's just how I've mounted it, because obviously I've removed all the brackets and everything for the cover. Okay. Moving along, you'll see I've put the other clip back on as well, so that will just clip over there in that particular case. And we go to the section over here where it breaks out, and we're going to go to injector 2. We're going to go to coolant temperature sensor, which is a 2Y sensor over there. Now, just before you freak out, I've put a coolant temperature sensor in here, okay? You guys will have just a blanking bolt in there on a 3UZ LS430, so don't freak out that you don't have the sensor on there. That is not normal. You should have a blanking bolt, not a coolant temperature sensor in there, okay? Also coming out here is then going to be our drive-by-wire throttle motor plug, so that's just the 2-wire plug that's over there. Also coming out here, we're going to have our oil control valve for the right bank, so again, this is for the VVT-i. And then also coming out here, we are then going to have our mass airflow sensor connector, all right? Now then, this is super important. The engines have different mass airflow sensors depending on which one you've got, okay? The best advice that I can give you is make sure that your mass airflow sensor matches your ECU, okay? Now, how you do that is really super easy. You go into Toyota DIY, you take your ECU, you put the part number in, then you go to Airbox, and it'll tell you exactly what mass airflow sensor is required for that particular vehicle. Nice and simple, okay? So you'll see the LS430 has this one where it goes flat. The GS430 and the SC430 have it angled at about 45 degrees. So there are different mass airflow sensors for different, different ECUs. And I do actually have all the part numbers written down at the bottom, so you can check mine against what you find in your particular case. Okay. Right, then lastly, the harness is going to pop down here, go down towards the bottom, and it's going to break out into 3 sections over here. Number 1 is your alternator. That's a 3-pin plug. So remember, this is the 3-pin plug on the 3UZ 5-speed, not the 4-pin that you get on the 6-speed, okay? And we have our oil level sensor plug. Okay, now again, because you're using the front sump, your oil level sensor is going to be here. The reason we have to build this new in this case, and if you've seen our GS and SC430 harnesses, we don't have to do this, is obviously because they are actually front sump from factory, so the oil level sensor is already coming out here. So the LS, because the oil level sensor is on the other side of the engine, obviously we remove it and we put it as part of the new sections of wiring that we do actually build into the engine harness. And then lastly, we have our Lambda sensor plug for this side, okay? Now, the astute amongst you who've worked on a few of these engines, you'll actually notice that when it's a 3UZ VVT-i, the Lambda sensor is a short plug, so this is much longer, and the actual plug on the engine harness reaches all the way back. On the 3UZs, this is a long plug from the actual Lambda sensor, and so this plug from the harness is actually quite short and just comes about here. Okay. Now then, there's something important about that. The wiring for this long one and the other short one that's on the other side is different on the actual Lambda sensor itself, okay? So you need to be careful. You can't use this long one on the left bank. It's only on the right bank, and there are 2 different part numbers. And again, I have them listed down below for you. I've also put the Denso part number for you guys, so you can actually get them slightly cheaper, obviously, than what Toyota sell, okay? So really nice and simple, but make sure you have the long one on the right bank and the short one on the left bank. If you have the short one here, this is not going to reach, obviously, so that's a good indication, but yeah, that is super important. Right, so that is the entire harness. Now, obviously, that is really straightforward. It just goes in a U shape, nothing too complicated there, and obviously, I've explained everything in great detail as to exactly where it goes. Now then, other things that you need to connect on the engine. So obviously we've taken care of the engine harness. The ECU box is completely sorted. Everything plugs in there. You do not have to stress or worry about that. But there are a couple of other wires that need to be connected that you have to do on your side. Number 1 is the main alternator connector. So you see that bolt's on there. 12 socket will unloosen that and tighten back up again. But what you're going to do is take a long cable, run it down across, and you are going to come up over here to your fuse box over here, and you can see that's where my cable goes. You can actually see it runs down there and then across underneath the engine over to the other side. Again, 10mm socket, that'll loosen this one and you can plug it in there. Now, I always say to people, please, please, please put it here, because this 120 amp fuse is what protects the alternator. So if that wire that runs underneath your subframe ever gets caught or something like that, it'll blow that fuse and it'll stop that wire catching fire. So guys, please don't be tempted to just whack this on here. If you do, you've got an unfused live cable that's running right across your subframe and so on. So not ideal. Please plug it in there, so at least if that cable ever gets clipped or ripped or caught or anything at all, it'll blow that fuse and then boom, your car is then safe and you don't have to worry about it catching fire. Okay, right, that's the alternator main power. Next up is the earth. Okay, so you'll see here, this is what you should have on your IS200. This cable goes from the negative of the battery, it goes down, it bolts to the chassis, so this is the ground for your entire vehicle. It then runs underneath and you end up with basically this. Okay, so that's your standard IS200 earth cable, right? And that can then bolt to the block. All right, so that is your main earth for your engine. It bolts directly to the block. It's what your starter and everything earth through. So again, nice, simple, straightforward, just bolt it to the block. Okay, if you find that the cable's a bit too small, you're not 100% sure on it, obviously it works absolutely fine. There's literally, I can't even imagine how many IS200 300 swaps around the world. But again, if you want to, you're perfectly fine to add another earth onto there. What I normally advise, as well as the earth that runs from the battery, is there was an earth braid, so it's not an insulated wire, it's just a braid that ran from one of the gearbox bolts to the chassis leg. I definitely advise installing that. Always good to have that in. And obviously at the back of the cylinder heads here, either there or there, those are M8 nuts. Okay, now on your IS200, obviously you had a bar that ran across there for your brake booster. Okay, you don't actually need that anymore, because here is where you're going to have a nozzle sticking out, and that's going to be your brake booster. But most importantly, there was an earth point on there. You can take an earth from there to the actual cylinder head, and you'll notice when you pulled out your IS200 or your 2JZ for your IS300, there was actually an earth strap that went from the firewall there to the engine itself. So just replace that. So at the minimum, I would say, is to have this earth going from there to the block, the earth braid from the gearbox bolt to the chassis leg, and the earth braid coming from the cylinder head to the firewall. Okay, if you want to add another one, perfectly fine, but you should be absolutely fine with those 3 earths. Okay, right, so we've done alternator, we've done earth. Obviously your main starter cable is already part of the harness, so that's going to be bolted down there. And one other thing that people often forget is this one over here. This comes from the fuse box and it goes to there. So that supplies power to the entire vehicle. Don't plug that in, nothing is going to work. So do make sure that you do actually plug that in, and obviously that is connected and everything should be working 100%. Okay, so again, hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully I've gone through everything so you don't run into any issues on there. But again, if you do, just give me a quick shout. But that should pretty much cover the entire installation of the actual engine harness itself. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get ready. We're going to come back and we're going to start doing the testing on the harness. So again, testing with just the ignition on and with the engine actually running as well. So for me, it'll be a few minutes. For you, 1 second. We'll see you in a bit. Right, so we are now back for the testing of the engine harness. And as I said, made up of 2 sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine running. First thing I'm going to do is we're going to go through all of the tests. I'm going to give you a brief explanation of what we are actually testing and why we're testing it, and then we'll jump straight into it. So the first section you see over here, that's with the ignition on and that's with the engine running. All right, so first test you see there is ambient temperature, or what we call outside temperature, depending on where you are. But basically we're going to come over here and look at the climate control here and make sure that we get a outside temperature. Now in this case, it is actually detected and sensed by the ECU, so that will go up and down as the outside temperature either rises or lowers. Okay. Next up, we're going to pop back over to the clocks over here, and we're going to be looking for the check engine light, the charge light or alternator light, and the oil pressure light. Okay, so check engine light will be up there. I think battery lights over there, oil lights over there. Now, obviously, the low oil level bulb I have removed because obviously I do like non-VVT-i harnesses on here. That's a bit annoying to have that on there, but yours should work as well as long as you plug in that particular plug over there. Another quick note on this particular situation, the traction control, which is a very basic system on the IS200, does not interface with the 3UZ. That has vehicle stability control, not TRC. So the TRC bulb you do need to remove from the dash. Okay, so make sure you do that before you button everything up, because obviously that's just going to flash and annoy the hell out of you. Right, Once we've done that, we're then going to go to reverse. So all I'm basically going to do, you see I've already got a wire in there. I'm just going to bridge the reverse switch over there, which is what your gearbox is going to do. And we're going to get the beep coming from the cluster, which tells me that from the plug all the way to inside the vehicle, the reverse wiring is 100%. And obviously when you put it into reverse, your reverse lights and everything will come on the vehicle. Speedo, you'll see I've said not applicable because in this case it's a BMW gearbox. So again, he's going to be fitting that wire to his ABS ECU and running it to the clocks, and that's how he's going to get his speed. So we're not going to be able to test anything because there's no speed sensor to test in this particular case. OBD2 test, basically what I'm testing is to make sure that the OBD2 machine does actually connect to the vehicle. Now, because it's a 3UZ 5-speed, it uses the same type of communication as the IS200. So again, this plugs directly into your standard OBD2 port that's in the driver's footwell. Obviously, this is a right-hand drive vehicle, left-hand drive, it is still in the driver's footwell, so there's absolutely no problems there at all. Next up is going to be fuel pump relay. So again, this particular case, the LS430, the fuel pump is controlled via the ECU, so I can use my machine to actually test the fuel pump relay with the ECU controlling it, okay? Now, I do have a video about fuel pump systems and how they work. Please watch that because there's something very important there. The fact that the Toyota and Lexus systems do not prime, okay? People get caught out by that so often. They've been driving an IS200 for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, but they've never actually realized that the fuel pump does not prime when you put the ignition on. But of course, when you do a swap, you're listening for things that you were never listening before, and all of a sudden you turn the key on and, oh, it doesn't prime. Perfectly normal. That's exactly how Lexus and Toyota systems work. Again, but I explain it in much more detail in the video there that's linked down below. Next up is the AC system. So there's two things we're going to test. We're going to test the AC clutch. So I'm going to use my device here to actually activate the magnetic clutch relay. Magnetic clutch relays in that fuse box there by the ECU, okay? And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the live data, and we're going to see that the AC request signal, so in other words, when I press the button inside the vehicle there, it tells me that the AC signal goes from off to on, and so on. So again, the ECU is controlling the AC system, so it's determining when to activate or deactivate the AC magnetic clutch relay. Then we have our brake switch, okay? So again, this refers back to that relay that you saw inside the ECU box. This one over here, because obviously the LS430 used a 4-wire brake switch, whereas the IS200 manual uses a 2-wire brake switch. Now, of course, the IS200 Auto does use a 4-wire brake switch because that came with cruise control. Okay, but obviously we make these harnesses not only for one particular type of IS200, so rather than rely on the fact that we would say, oh, this will only work if it's an auto, we just put the relay in. So even if you connected an auto, it's still going to work. If you connect it into an IS200 auto, it's still going to work. But obviously what we're going to basically do is make sure that it also works in a manual IS200 chassis as well. Okay, gear/shifter wiring, obviously not applicable because that is only for an auto setup, okay? Next up is going to be with the engine running. So first thing is the starter circuit. Now that's really, really simple. I'm just going to turn the key. What I want to make sure is when it's all plugged into your car, when you turn the key, the engine cranks over. That's basically all we're looking for, okay? ACIS, or acoustic control induction system, what we're looking for is we're looking for this valve to go from the upright position to the down position, and it does it a few seconds after the engine starts. So by the time we turn the key and turn here, it should already be in the downward position. Drive-by-wire test, it's as simple as it sounds. I'm basically going to press the accelerator pedal and the engine's going to rev up. If it does, I know everything works and all the connections from the pedal to the ECU and everything and to the throttle motor is all 100%. Oil control valve test, so that's basically what I'm going to do is use my machine to then test both oil control valves, so bank 1 and bank 2. You'll see the process that it goes through. It basically advances and retards the cam just to make sure that everything's working through the full motion. So the engine makes a really lumpy sound when it does it. So if I hear the lumpy sound, I know it's all working as it should do. Injectors and coils. So what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to pull each injector off one by one and listen for the misfire. I want to hear every single cylinder misfire. These are fully sequential injection and ignition engines. So obviously as I pull the injectors out, each cylinder will misfire, and when I put it back, it'll go back to running smooth again. Now, the reason I pull the injectors out and not the coils is on the 3UZ, if you didn't know this, but once the 3UZ ECU detects a misfire on a cylinder, which it gets a feedback signal from the coil, it shuts down that injector for that cylinder, okay? It's a nice little safety feature. Obviously, if the cylinder's not firing, why inject fuel and just end up washing the bores because nothing's happening there. So obviously, if I disconnected each coil, I'd eventually end up with an engine that's firing on no cylinders, because obviously every coil I disconnected, it would then shut the injector down for that particular cylinder. Okay, tacho. again, we're just going to come over to the clocks and make sure that we're getting a tacho signal through there. We'll give the engine a quick rev as well to show you that it goes up as the engine ups. And as I said, it is adjustable. I've adjusted it here to the best of my ability, but obviously in terms of the angle, when you're actually sitting in the vehicle, that might change slightly. So again, if you get a friend to help you out there, you can plug in an OBD2 machine, see what engine RPM you are, hold it at like 2000, and then you can just turn the little screw in the box there to adjust it how you like it. Okay, coolant temp. So again, we just want to make sure that we are actually getting a coolant temperature on the dash. That's basically what we're looking for there. And then lastly, diagnostics. We're going to go through and show you that there are no error codes, because obviously we remapped the ECU. So there's no error codes for the automatic transmission. There's no error codes for the secondary Lambda sensors. Obviously it's got more power, better throttle response, all of that jazz that comes along with the remap as well. Right, so that's all the tests that we're going to do. Let's jump into it. Okay, so first of all, obviously, because it's plug and play, you're just going to take your key and you're going to insert it and turn the ignition on. Okay, in the meantime, let's get this thing up and running. But first test we want to do is the ambient temperature. So if we take a look over here, you'll see we've got 21 degrees. Okay, fantastic. That's working exactly as I would expect it to. Next up, we're going to be looking at the check engine light, the charge light, and the oil pressure. So as I said, we've got our check engine light there, our battery light over there, so that tells us whether the alternator is charging. You do also have a battery meter in the gauge as well, and your low oil pressure lights. Remember, your low oil level light up here, mine's been removed because of all the different harnesses I test, but that should also work as well as long as you plug in your oil level sensor over there. Okay. So let's pop over and let's test this reverse one. So basically what we're looking for is I'm going to jump over there. We're going to bridge that particular reverse plug. And then obviously we're going to hear the annoying beep that comes on the IS200. Okay, so let's pop over here. And as you see, I'm just going to touch it there. And you can hear that beeping away there. Okay, now, the reason I push the wire in there is basically it does a good test for me, and obviously it shows that from the terminal all the way down, so it shows me that the crimps are okay on the terminal, it's making good connection, and obviously that is what we're looking for to make sure that everything is working 100%. Okay, so speedo, again, we're not doing the speedo, it is a manual, so the guy's going to be taking the speed signal from his ABS ECU here and inside the vehicle to the cluster, and that's how he's going to be getting that particular setup over there. Right, next up is the OBD2 test. Okay, so at the moment, my machine is now busy detecting the physical ECU that is in there. So let's give that a second to do that. Make sure that's plugged in correctly. Right, this is not the fastest machine in the world. I normally have it already done, but you can see that it's picked up as an LS430. So even though it's plugged into the IS200, it has picked up that it's an LS430. Okay. Obviously, we want to go to the engine and electronic transmission control. Now, what you guys would have noticed if you watched some of my other videos, you'll see that that gets split into 3 sections on a 6-speed. So although they use the same ECU for both the engine and the transmission, inside the ECU, there is actually a sort of a completely separate control system for the transmission, whereas on the 5 speeds, they put it all in one there for you, okay? Right, so again, we can see the OBD2 machine is working 100%, and what we want to do now is we want to test the fuel pump relay. Okay, so let's get into the engine and ECT. And that should pop up there now. Yep, and you can see we've got live data there. We've got 62 degrees. Obviously, I've run the engine up to full temperature to make sure everything works prior. Intake temperature, 25 degrees, throttle position, 16%. Now, we want to go into active test. And you'll see it says fuel pump relay, fuel pump. If you've watched my video about fuel pumps, you'll understand why the fuel pump relay is there and why that is not applicable for testing the actual fuel pump output. Right, so we've gone into there now, so that's absolutely perfect. So fuel pump at the moment is off. I'm going to keep quiet now and I'm going to turn it on. And turn it off. Okay, I hope you can hear that. Obviously, we've got a lot of noise here. There's a workshop, a lot of workshops around us. But yeah, you can hear the relay actually click and you can hear the fuel pump fire up there. So that's absolutely perfect. Right, next up is AC clutch. Okay, so what I want to basically do is again go into active test. And again, we're going to go to AC magnetic clutch relay. And again, it's going to be a relay that's clicking, so I'm just going to hold the camera over the other side there, but I'm going to turn it on and off. And let me move the camera closer to there. So again, it's that little relay box with the 4 relays in there, so I'm going to keep quiet. Fantastic. So hopefully you heard that. Okay, so that tells me that the engine ECU is able to control the AC magnetic clutch relay, which will obviously activate the AC system or activate the AC pump. Next up, obviously, we want to see that the actual signal from the car is coming into the vehicle. So next thing we want to look at is this AC signal over here, okay? You can see currently it is off, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop around here and I'm going to press the button. See the lights up on the dash there. I'm going to move along to here and you'll now see that AC signal is on, and we'll quickly turn it off. And AC signal then goes to off. Fantastic. That's all I want to see, because that information is transmitted via multiplex, which is obviously Toyota's proprietary CAN. They also call it the bean system or whatever. But anyway, it's not a direct wire from the inside of the vehicle to the ECU. So we have to make sure that part of the remap is obviously we remap that multiplex data to talk between the IS200, 300 Altezza and the 3UZ ECU. Okay. And that obviously applies to things like the battery light, the oil light, coolant temperature, all of that gets transmitted via MPX. That's all been changed in the remap on the ECU to work correctly with that. Okay, so that's AC clutch and AC request. So the last thing we're going to do is the brake switch. Okay, so down here you can see I have a stop light switch which is off. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to imitate obviously the vehicle having the brakes pressed. It'll provide a 12-volt signal, and that'll obviously activate our relay over there. Now, interesting, the reason we actually have the relay over there is because the 4-wire brake system, how it works is effectively it tells the ECU when the brakes are pressed and also when they're not pressed. Now, what you'll notice if you do a lot of wiring for Toyotas is this sort of system seems to be on the vehicles that come with cruise control. And the reason I've sort of come to that deduction is because the only vehicle that I know that I've come across that doesn't have the 4-wire brake switch is the IS200 manual. And the unique feature about the IS200 manual versus the IS200 auto is the lack of cruise control. Okay. So again, let's get back to the testing. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this wire, which would be our brake switch wire. I'm going to feed it 12 volts. Let me do that again so you can hear. Okay, let's get that to stay in there. There you go. So you can hear the relay clicking. And most importantly, let's pop over to here. And you can see my stop light switch is now on. Perfect. So I know that the correct signals are going to the ECU. Quickly pull that out. You can hear the relay clicking away there. Pop back over to here and you can see my stop light switch is now off. So that's fantastic. Okay, right. So that is all the testing with the ignition on. So you can see all of the systems are working exactly as I expected to. We've got ambient temperature. We've got all the warning lights on the dash. We've obviously got coolant temperature as well, and everything else like the AC and everything is working 100%. So for you, it's going to be 1 second. For me, I'm just going to go start it up again, make sure everything's 100%, and we'll come back and we'll do the testing with the engine running. See you in a second. Bye-bye. Right, guys, so we are back now for the testing with the engine running. Now, obviously, I've been through all the tests, so I'm going to do a very quick recap on what we're going to do, because it is going to be rather loud when the engine is running. So you might hear me, you might not, but let's do a quick recap. So first off, starter circuit. Just going to turn the key, make sure the engine turns over and starts. Very simple. ACIS, we're going to make sure the valve goes down there. Drive by wire, give the thing a quick rev and you can hear it rev up. Oil control valve test, which we'll do on the OBD2 machine. Injectors and coils, I'm going to pull each injector out one by one and make sure the engine misfires, and obviously stops misfiring when I plug it back in again. Tacho, we'll make sure the tacho works and I'll give it a rev so you can see it going up and down. Coolant temp, obviously I've let it cool down a bit so we can see a bigger increase in the coolant temperature, so you can make sure that that's working. And then we'll go into the diagnostics of the setup and how you do it and show you that there's no codes, etc, etc. Okay, so let's jump into it. I'll put my ear defenders on now and we're going to go over to the key and let's start her up. There you go. So that's that. You can see the ACIS has gone down, so that's gravy. Drive-by-wire test. Fantastic. Oil control valve test. So let's just go into active test. Oil control valve bank 1. Perfect. Let's go into bank 2. matter. Right, injectors and coils. So let's start at number 8. Number 6. Number 4. Number 2. Go over to the other side. Injector 7. Injector 5. Injector 3. And the painful one, injector 1. Okie dokie. That's all the injectors. Let's look at the tacho. So you can see there, pretty accurate. It's under 1,000 there. Right, fantastic. That's the tacho working. And the coolant temp, you can see, has actually started rising. So that's absolutely fantastic. Okay. Right. Let's just kill her, put her back on again. And then what we'll do is we'll go into the diagnostics. So first thing I want to tell you guys is that basically the 3UZ for European and American ones, you cannot use the system whereby you just bridge the 2 terminals on the OBD2 port and the check engine light will flash the codes. That does not work, unfortunately, on the 3UZ, so you do require a machine to plug in to read the codes. It'll plug into the standard port that's in your engine bay, in your driver's footwell. So no funny situation there like on the 3UZ 6-speed because it used CAN. We've got to put an OBD2 plug in the ECU box, etc. You plug in like you would, like your car was a standard IS200. Really nice and straightforward and simple. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got 0 codes. Obviously evident because we had no check engine light on when it was running. We have battery light and oil light also went off, so we know that they are working correctly as well. Okay, right, so diagnostics. Obviously you've got 0 codes because we've remapped it for the get rid of the automatic transmission. We've got rid of the secondary Lambda sensors, so they're all gone. So if you do get a check engine light when the engine is running, there is a problem that needs to be looked at, and you need to have a machine to plug in order to see what the code is and what it does, and therefore fix it from there. Okay, right, if you ever need help with diagnostics, again, we are more than happy to help. You can always send us a message. Try and give us as much information as possible. And when I say as much information as possible, is there anything that you've changed in the vehicle? Has anything happened? Have you changed a part? Was it hot? Did you get different type of fuel? Sometimes things that you might think is completely irrelevant might be literally the most relevant thing on the planet. Okay, so you just need to make sure that obviously you give us all the information, and this not only applies to me, but anybody else you want diagnostic help from. You need to give as much information as is humanly possible. And even the smallest bit of information that you might think is irrelevant might be completely relevant. So always remember that, guys. That is just a general tip for diagnostics. Whatever you think is irrelevant might be completely relevant. So don't leave anything out when you're trying to help or get help with diagnostics on an engine. And it doesn't even apply to Toyota, it applies to everything as well. Okay. Right. So again, only the machine can log in and check the codes. You can't do it the old-fashioned way of bridging 2 ports and get the check engine light to flash. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is with the 3UZ European and American ones. It does work with the Japanese versions. That's the only version that I know of that you can actually bridge the 2 terminals and it works, okay? Now then, there's not to say that there's absolutely no point in bridging the terminals, because there is something cool that you can do when you bridge the terminals. So although you don't get the check engine light flashing and get your codes, you do still put the engine into a diagnostic mode, okay? Now, the pins in question on the OBD2 port are pin either 4 or 5, because both of them are ground, and 13. I think 5 and 13 or 4 and 13, they're like directly one above each other. And now that then puts the engine ECU into diagnostic mode. If you've got a 98 to 2001 IS200, you'll have this diagnosis port on the front, and you can take a look inside there. You'll see there's actually very few pins because it was kind of like dying out these types of plugs on there. But you can see in the top corner there's E1, if you can see in there. And then that middle one over there is TC, or trouble codes, okay? Once you put it into diagnostic mode by bridging those either with a wire, hair clip, whatever you want to do, paper clip, the one cool thing it'll do is it'll actually lock the timing at 10 degrees, okay? So you'll see here on the cover, and I've actually painted it white, you've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees. And on your crank pulley, if I'm lucky enough, and the engine has managed to stop in the correct place, you can actually see it inside there. Again, I've painted it white so you can see it nice and clear. But if you put the engine into diagnostic mode, you grab a timing light, you put it around ignition coil once. That's the one at the front on the left bank, or bank 1. Start the engine up, and you can use a timing light to determine whether or not the timing is correct. Okay, so you're looking for 10 degrees of timing. So when it's flashing, you should see the thing line up with a 10-degree mark, and it locks it throughout the whole rev range. So you can actually rev it up to like 2,000-3,000 RPM, and just make sure that it's not scattering around as well, which is another sort of, can cause an issue as well. Okay. So basically that is one cool feature that you can do with that. So before you pull off the covers and check the physical timing, actual mechanical marks on the engine, you can just do that if you've got a timing light handy, and you can just say, oh, there you go, it's about 3 degrees out or something like that. Then you can pull it off and go, okay, cool. This one is slipped or sort of moved, or your belt wasn't installed properly or something like that. So it's quite a cool check that you can do on that as well. Okay. Right. But from our side, super happy with everything. Runs smoothly, no dramas whatsoever. Obviously, we replaced every single connector that was broken, so it should be absolutely fine for hopefully another few years when it gets in there to the customer's vehicle and so on as well. Okay, but again, if you guys have any questions about anything that we've gone through today, please feel free to message us on our Facebook page, as well as via email at info@phoenixenginemanagement.com. What I will do as well, and it's kind of like an automatic response now, I've done a really nice video on how much information that we need to give you guys a quote, okay? What information we need, what's relevant, and so on. So when you message us now on Facebook, that'll come back as an automatic response. It'll take you to that video so we can give you a good in-depth look and see exactly what is the information that we need to get. Because obviously at the moment, we're exceptionally busy, and obviously I'm trying to narrow down and trying to get as much information from you guys to help speed up the process of doing a quote. So yeah, so thankfully, hopefully if you guys have watched that, it has been working. I'm getting a lot more of the correct information through at the very beginning of a query. So I'm really thankful for that, guys, for you guys for watching it, taking your time out, and obviously helping me get all the information that we need. But yeah, if you do have any questions, let me know. Like I said, below in the bottom, there is a bunch of links to videos to help you out with all different types of things. I've put a bunch of part numbers there in relation to the 3UZ engine. So not just the LS, but the LS, the GS, and the SC. Obviously I haven't included Crown and so on. We don't really see many of those, but again, all of that can be found on Toyota DIY, so that's no major issue at all. Okay, right, so come to the end of the video. Obviously, as always, we'll now cut to the photos of what we received from the customer, and again, what we ended up with when we finished all of our work. So thanks for watching, guys. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel?